On a warm summer evening in Cirebon, Indonesia, a teenage couple would cross paths with unknown forces of darkness. What initially appeared to be a tragic motorbike accident would unfold into one of the most mysterious and strange incidents of homicide Indonesia would ever experience. Whispers of conspiracies and ghostly possessions continue to haunt this case to this day. Who were these innocent young victims, and who were the real monsters behind the events that brutally ended their lives? Hello, and welcome to Shades of Murder. I am your host, Alita Caldwell. In this podcast, I discuss cases of murder from around the world and throughout history, attempting to unravel the layers of darkness that help make humans into monsters. Please be forewarned that each episode contains specific and at times very graphic and disturbing details of the case. This show is not intended for all audiences, and listener discretion is strongly advised. If you enjoy the show and would like to help it grow, please make sure that you are following or subscribed on your listening platform of choice, share with a friend, leave a rating, and leave a review. Your feedback and support makes all the difference. Thank you so much. Cirebon, known as the City of Shrimp, is a port city on the border between West Java and Central Java on the northern coastal plains of the region of Java in Indonesia. The culture there is particularly unique. It has a vibrant multi-ethnic blend of Sundanese and Javanese, along with Chinese, Indian, Arabic, and European descendants. Tourists throughout the country and around the world come to experience the beauty, culinary wonders, and historical landmarks of Cirebon. The Keraton Kasepuhan, a royal palace built in 1529, showcases intricate designs and picturesque gardens. Another site is the Sunyoragi Cave, which was an 18th century water palace, a cave complex originally built as a retreat for the sultans. It has amazing passages that resemble a labyrinth with magnificent statues and rock formations. Cirebon, as is most of Indonesia, is a relatively safe place to live and visit. Although the exact crime rate for the city of Cirebon is not recorded, Indonesia has one of the lowest homicide rates in the world, averaging 0.4 per 100,000 residents annually. Aside from common tourist scams or pickpocketing and isolated incidents of violence, which are more than often associated with drug trafficking, the night of August 27, 2016, would forever shatter this image when the community was deeply affected and divided by the horrific deaths of two of its young people. This is the true story behind the controversial horror film sensation, Vina, Before 7 Days. On a Saturday evening around 6 p.m., 16-year-old Vina Dewi Arcita was last seen by her friend Linda. The two girlfriends had been riding their motorbikes around the area, just messing around and having a good time. Vina ended up riding off shortly afterwards with her boyfriend Muhammad Aki Rizki. When 11 p.m. came around and Vina still wasn't home, her parents weren't happy about it, but they presumed she was off with Eki. It was well known by both of their families how smitten they were with one another. The two teens were madly in love. When Vina's parents learned from her friend Linda that she was last with Eki, they contacted his parents, but neither of them were there, and they didn't know where the two kids could be. Still, the families didn't panic right away until neither of their children showed up the following morning. In the early morning hours of August 28th, 3 police officers discovered the site of a terrible scene. On Jalan Raya Tulun in the Tulun district, 2 young teenagers were found underneath a bridge on an elevated road, also known as a flyover, in what appeared to be a tragic motorcycle accident. The young male was pronounced dead at the scene. The female victim was still alive, but she was suffering from severe injuries. Both were taken to the hospital, but tragically, the young girl also later died. The 2 young victims were identified as 16-year-old Vina Dewi Arsita and 16-year-old Muhammad Eki Rizki Rudiani. When Vina Arsita was found, she was wearing a skirt that was hiked up with her underwear visible. However, according to Dr. Ida Silvia, who treated Vina on the night she was brought into the emergency room, she was wearing dark blue long pants. There were also strange circumstances around the children's deaths, and the scene of the accident didn't make any sense. Vina's mobile phone had been found without any damage done to it, and even more strangely was her motorbike that barely had a scratch. It had minimal damage. The handlebar was bent, it had a broken fender, and there were 20 to 30 centimeter-sized scratches. Traces of cement were discovered on the front iron tire, and scratches on the asphalt for 1.5 meters, but strangely, there were no brake marks. Even more bizarre is that neither of their helmets were broken, nor were any parts of the motorcycle. All of these elements left her family wondering, how was it possible that Vina and Eki had been killed in a traffic accident? Vina and Eki's families were heartbroken, but they had no reason at the time to doubt what the police were telling them. 3 days later, everything they believed would change. After Vina and Eki's bodies were found, her sister, Marliana, received a shocking and strange phone call. It was from the brother of one of Vina's good friends, Linda, whom she had been with on the night she was killed. He told Marliana that the spirit of her dead sister had entered into his sister and was speaking through her. Marliana went to her father, and they immediately went over to Linda's house to see what was going on. When they arrived, Linda's brother brought Marliana and her father to Linda, who was waiting for them. Linda's face and eyes were hers, and her voice didn't change, but the words were those of Vina's. Vina's sister Marliana recorded the voice that was coming from her friend Linda, who was seemingly possessed by Vina's spirit. The spirit said to them, "Don't be fooled by the police. It wasn't an accident. I was raped, killed, tortured, hit by wooden block." During the recording of the alleged channeling of her sister through her friend, a name was mentioned, Perang. Marliana went to the police with a recording of the spirit of her dead sister, along with her mobile phone and other unreported evidence. With this information, law enforcement decided to reinvestigate the case as a homicide. This may sound very weird, not to mention beyond the realms of normal investigative protocols, but Indonesia is a land full of mysticism, and beliefs in the supernatural are commonplace. Even though the police couldn't use the recording as evidence in court to prosecute any offenders, the information conveyed, or rather channeled through Linda, was highly valuable to their investigation. Before this, their deaths were deemed accidental, and there was no intention of pursuing the incident as anything outside of a tragic accident. The autopsy revealed elements of their deaths that also didn't equate to being an accident. Vina's wrists had been crushed, and there was indication of sexual violation. Investigators began to look into the man mentioned during the alleged possession of Vina's friends and his associated motorbike gang members. Police officers soon gathered evidence to further support the events as told by Vina through Linda. They collected some of their motorbikes, their phones and clothing, in addition to rocks and bits of bamboo. It was believed that Vina and Eki had been ambushed and brutally murdered by 11 gang members, led by the man, Parang. 8 of the 11 men were soon identified and promptly arrested, charged with the rape and double homicide of the 2 teenagers. 3 of the men, including the man believed to be the mastermind, Parang, had disappeared. The defense counsel proposed the argument that there was no homicide at all, and that the couple was in fact killed in a motorcycle crash, just as the initial investigation had determined. However, the subsequent investigation went into the extreme opposite direction, and the prosecution claimed that Vina had been gang raped by the motorcycle gang members before she and Eki were viciously murdered. The court case was held behind closed doors, mainly due to the violently graphic nature of the crime and the victims being minors. A little over a year later, in May of 2017, the court would find all 8 men guilty of the sexual violation of Vina and the first-degree murders of her and her boyfriend Eki. 7 of the men were handed life sentences, and another was given 8 years imprisonment due to his being a minor at the time. It appeared that was the extent of the case, and any semblance of justice for Vina Arcita and Eki Rudiani and their families. 7 years after these atrocious crimes occurred in Cirebon, a controversial horror film was released based on the murders and Vina's friend's alleged possession. It was an immediate success in Indonesia, becoming the second highest grossing film of 2024. The movie was met with some backlash, with many viewing its graphic depiction of the sexual violence and murders of 2 minors to be done in poor taste, although it was an example of the blurry ethical line between the portrayal of art imitating life, especially concerning true crime. The film also reignited society's interest in their murders and in hunting down the 3 men who had gone unpunished. Social media became fascinated with this horrific and strange story, involving the brutal slaying of 2 young lovers, a possessed friend who led the police to reinvestigate their accidental deaths, and what initially appeared to be a police cover-up. Within a week of the movie hitting theaters, law enforcement contacted Vina Arcita's family to inform them that the investigation had been escalated to now be handled by the much larger police force of the West Java Regional Police. On May 21, 2024, only 1 week later, the police arrested 2 men and a construction worker named Peggy Setiawan. They had located one of the missing assailants, their main suspect, who was still wanted for rape and double murder. If convicted, he was facing the death penalty. The police later reported that they now believed the 2 wanted outstanding suspects, referred to as Danny and Andy in the records, were not real people, but rather they were possibly invented by some of the other offenders as potential suspects to divert attention, and maybe were completely fabricated. West Java Police's Criminal Investigation Director, Chief Commissioner Surawan, came forward, stating that the confusion around the number of wanted fugitives in the couple's death was due to misinformation spread by social media. Yet in another statement, the commissioner claimed they initially believed there were 3 wanted men because of different statements that were made by the other offenders. Even Vina's sister Marliana couldn't help but have mixed emotions regarding the investigation. To have another suspect located and arrested for Vina and Eki's murder almost 8 years later was something to celebrate, to be happy about. But now, with the police changing the narrative about the two other fugitives no longer existing, troubled her. She and her family had received information and followed the investigation exclusively from police depositions, which specifically stated that there were 3 remaining murder suspects at large. Now, officials swore that the 2 other men never existed. The police made it very difficult for Marliana to take them at their word. This is when the case became even more convoluted. Questions around who the real perpetrators were and who may have been victims of the system began to surface. Upon Peggy Setiawan's arrest, he was presented at a news conference as having been the mastermind in the rape and double homicide, which he vehemently denied having anything to do with. He cried out accusations against the police and said, "I never committed the murder. This is slander. I am willing to die to prove that I am innocent." In response, the police officers gagged him and escorted him to a prison cell, silencing him from speaking to the press any further. It is important to note that Indonesia doesn't have a bail system. Instead, they operate within a suspension of detention system, where a suspect can request to be released from detention. Only an investigator, a judge, or a prosecutor has the authority to grant this request. Their decision is primarily based on their assessment of whether the suspect is a flight risk or a danger to the community. The PR chief for the West Java region, Senior Commissioner Jules Abraham Abast, confirmed to the press that, along with his team, the National Police Headquarters Criminal Investigation Unit and the Cirebon City Police would perform a thorough and transparent investigation. Yet there was only evidence that the opposite occurred. The suspect's grandmother's house was subsequently searched the following day. However, Peggy Setiawan's attorney, Sagianti Iriani, was never informed of the incident and was in fact with her client during the BAP. The BAP is the standard official police report recorded during an interrogation. She also observed how only 2 days after the teens' bodies were found, back in August of 2016, Peggy's residence was searched and 2 motorcycles were confiscated, one that was his own and the other was his uncle's. At the time, Peggy Setiawan was not there and had already been working in Bandung as a construction worker since July. According to his lawyer Iriani, the police were informed of this. Peggy Setiawan's lawyer claimed that her client was not in Cirebon on the night the 2 teens were killed. His parents and several of his colleagues offered to testify to his living in Bandung in August 2016. The location of Peggy Setiawan was never actively pursued by the police. However, according to Senior Commissioner Surawan, the Director of General Crimes for West Java Regional Police, he was confident that Peggy was the primary offender. He was the ringleader, Parang, behind the rape and double homicide. As to why it took 7 years to track him down, the police explained that Peggy Setiawan had relocated several times between Cirebon and Bandung, a city that was 140 kilometers away, and was living under a fake identity, Rabi Irawan. He had changed his name, and his biological father would acknowledge him and introduce him to other people as his nephew and not his son, further aiding his concealment. According to Commissioner Sarawan, Peggy Setiawan initially tried to hide his real identity from September 2016 to 2019, when he rented a boarding room in Katapang, Bandung region, under the name Robi Irawan. Sarawan pointed to key witnesses at the crime scene and evidence in connection with his motorbike registration, which was allegedly used in the attack, and which belonged to Peggy. Cirebon informed the press that if he wanted to accuse the police of mistreatment, then he could file a pretrial motion, which the suspect did. On July 8, 2024, Peggy Setiawan's fate was determined at his pretrial motion. Article 184 of the Criminal Procedure Code in Indonesian law states that to meet the requirements of the evidentiary process, 2 of the following sufficient pieces of preliminary evidence must be found. These can include testimony, witnesses, experts, and the suspect, in addition to official letters and instructions. Senior Commissioner Nurhadi Handayani of the West Java Regional Police Chief of Legal Affairs stated that they had collected 3 pieces of sufficient evidence to determine that Peggy was the suspect in question, which he believed would prove to the judge that Peggy Setiawan was in fact the fugitive from the 2016 files. Handayani addressed the conflicting information. He said that the reason Peggy appeared to be in Bandung at the time of the murders and not in Cirebon was that the timelines were delivered inaccurately by his legal team. According to Handayani, in Bandung, when someone was doing homework, what date was it? It was July, right? The homeowner claimed it was August, so where was he living in July? Logically, there's a difference between the child and his parents. Those are the existing clues. The answers and justifications the police provided to the court and the community remained convoluted and puzzling. The judge heard all the inconsistencies of the case, in particular the police investigation and the arrest of Peggy Setiawan as their lead suspect. The data itself in the DPO, or wanted persons list, did not match the description of the man in custody. The address and physical characteristics of the fugitive were different from those of Peggy Setiawan. The fugitive was described as being 31 years old, with curly hair, multiple earrings, and an address in Banjar, Wanganan. Peggy Setiawan was 27 years old, with straight hair, no earrings, nor signs of ear piercings, and had an address in Kapong Pangan. None of the convicted offenders knew who the man was. Not only was Peggy Setiawan not known as a member of any motorcycle gang, but he wasn't well known by the residents of his village at all. He was known for being very quiet, even unsociable, and often left the city. On July 8, 2024, Judge Iman Suleiman declared the suspect's status as invalid and declared that all associated documents regarding his being a suspect as invalid and null and void. In a shocking turn of events, the judge ordered that the police release the suspect from detention immediately and that any further investigation into Peggy Setiawan as a suspect was to end. The judge also made it a requirement for the West Java Regional Police to take the necessary steps to restore his dignity and honor by declaring him an invalid suspect in the rape of Vina and the murders of both she and Eki. Peggy Setiawan's lawyer further accused the police of having made a wrongful arrest, and by having removed 2 other suspects from the DPO list, they focused solely on him. According to Peggy's attorney, the primary issue is that her client's arrest was based on the Cirebon District Court's ruling and that the West Java Regional Police had conflicting information regarding the 3 wanted men. The original police indictment had listed 11 men, including the 3 fugitives, Andy, Danny, and Parong. According to official records of the West Java Regional Police, these 3 men were initially held in custody and then released, but now they claimed these 2 other men, Andy and Danny, didn't even exist. However, during the pretrial motion, the court addressed that the 2 other fugitives are real and still on the run. It seemed obvious to Peggy Cetione's lawyer that the investigators were lying. Social media also aimed at the police, calling Peggy Cetione's arrest an intentional sacrifice. He was marginalized, young, poor, a construction worker who had no connections or power, nor did his family. Many people believed that law enforcement viewed him as disposable and tried to convict him to close up the case. When Peggy Cetione was released from prison, there was an outpour of support and faith in his innocence as hundreds of residents gathered at his home to welcome him back. At this time, there were growing concerns expressed by the community and members of the justice system regarding the lack of transparency and integrity in the handling of this investigation. Some community members even blamed Vina Arcita's family for wrongful accusations and the torture of at least one offender. Then rumors began to swirl around police corruption and torture-induced confessions. These rumors were substantiated by one of the police's and prosecutors' key witnesses, a man named Didi Rizwanto, key witness for the prosecution who helped secure the conviction of the 8 suspects, came forward with shocking allegations. He said his testimony was false. Didi Rizwanto alleged that the murder case may have been fabricated by the father of Mohammed Rizki Eki Rudiani. Eki's father was a first inspector with the Cirebon Police Department. He was a low-ranking officer in the narcotics division at the time. Somehow, he became heavily involved in the homicide investigation and arrest of several of the murder suspects. Inspector Rudiani created his own team to conduct his own investigation, including visiting the crime scene, gathering information, and arresting and interviewing suspects. Further, he interrogated them inside the narcotics room without an assignment letter or a legal order to do so. Didi Rizwanto claimed that he and his co-worker, Ayep, from a car wash, went to the police station. Both Ayep and Inspector Rudiani pressured him into making false allegations against the men, as if the arrangement had previously been discussed. Rizwanto revealed that under the instruction of Inspector Rudiani, he was to falsely identify each of the suspects by name. Inspector Rudiani even provided him with the brands of motorcycles the men rode, so it sounded as if he had been witness to the gang chasing after the couple. Inspector Rudiani asked the men to testify that they saw a motorcycle gang chasing Vina and Eki down the street, throwing stones and carrying pieces of bamboo. Didi claimed he felt intimidated by Rudiani because he was a police inspector and he was afraid of what would happen to him if he didn't do what was asked. When he asked his co-worker Ayep why they should lie for the cops, he said that the gang had bullied him in the past, so he could care less about what happened to the suspects. During a podcast interview with a former regent, Didi Rizwanto swore that he was telling the truth now, and he was willing to testify before Barrascrim, which is the criminal investigation unit of the National Police. In a separate video he posted on YouTube, Didi apologized for lying to the convicted men. Didi Rizwanto wasn't the only witness who ended up retracting their testimony. Liga Akbar, who was a friend of the victim Eki Rudiani, had sworn in the trials that the 8 men convicted of murder that he met Eki on the night of the murders. He had first been asked to come identify some of the items that were belonging to Eki, but while he was there, Liga was pressured into claiming he was with Eki at the Tulun Bridge, where he saw a group of men chasing after him and Vina. This was to corroborate the story Didi Rizwanto and Ayep had told about witnessing the motorcycle gang throw stones and carrying bamboo sticks at the couple before chasing them to their deaths. Around this time, all 8 convicted offenders decided to retract their statements, alleging their criminal involvement. They swore now that Inspector Rudiani had tortured them into making false confessions. The police responded by claiming that it was at the instruction of their lawyers that the prisoners withdraw their statements, and for no other reason. All 8 of the suspects had been interrogated by the police without any legal protection or family members being present, including the minor. Yet the judge at the time ignored this blatant violation of their rights. The men claimed that they were tortured by officers at the Cirebon Metropolitan Police. They didn't even know the victims or their alleged leader, Parong, nor the other 2 fugitives. One of the convicts even filed an official complaint with the police department against Inspector Rudiani. All 7 men appealed their life sentences. The legal team addressed multiple violations and procedural errors that were made during the investigation and in their criminal trials. Specifically, their forensic team claimed that there was no forensic evidence connecting them to the crime. Even worse was how forensic evidence was blatantly ignored and even refuted by the police. They refused to look at security camera footage from the scene of the crime and wouldn't conduct any DNA tests on the men. There was no scientific proof that they had been the offenders in the sexual assault or the double homicide. Inspector Rudiani was highly criticized for stepping way beyond the parameters of his authority and causing bias in the investigation, which opened up an examination into the investigation and his role. It seems it would have been simple enough to just not let the man participate in any of the proceedings or interviews. Needless to say, this officer's involvement in his son's murder case would have been a direct conflict of interest. This is something that is highly discouraged and more often than not leads to an officer being removed from a case if they are closely tied to anyone involved. This normally would be enforced, understandably so, because high emotions lead to biased actions and even illegal, sometimes criminal methods. There was also discussion about whether or not the fugitives were relatives of an official or high-ranking police officer. The possibility of a conspiracy revolving around the case continues to be shared by many today. With the lack of forensic evidence, conflicting characters, or rather offenders involved in the crime, on June 15, 2024, a person on YouTube released a statement claiming that one of the murderers was the son of an official and the grandson of a national police official. None of these claims were looked into. According to the daily chair of the National Police Commission, Vina, significant deficiencies and concerns regarding the investigation existed, including the methods used, or rather not employed, by the scientific crime investigation, and the allegations of intimidation and violence used by the police. Mamoto stated that it was necessary to conduct an investigative audit into the procedures. On June 20, 2024, the National Police Headquarters concluded that they found no violations throughout their examination performed by the Professional and Security Division, nor were any violations made into the General Supervision Inspectorate done on Inspector Rudiani. This opened up a domino effect on what a law enforcement officer in Indonesia could legally get away with doing. This precedent ultimately gave fellow police officers the authority to conduct investigations and pursue prosecutions without a formal task or order letter. Ignoring the seriousness of Inspector Rudiani's actions gave the police the allowance, almost permission, to arrest a suspect without having any sufficient initial evidence. Even more unsettling is how it established a permitted environment and atmosphere for potential police abuse, including violent torture of a suspect to induce a false confession. An equally concerning issue is how the charges made by the prosecution that were supported by the judge in the criminal trials of these 8 men didn't match up with the evidence. The prosecutor had claimed injuries were made to the victims by some kind of long-bladed weapon, such as a samurai sword, which, as addressed in their judicial review, their autopsies didn't indicate. Even worse were claims of Vina being the victim of gang rape. The only evidence to support this was sperm found in the victim's later exhumed body, which was never tested against her boyfriend Eki, nor any of the suspects. There were also 3 separate crime scenes that were not individually or diligently investigated. The first scene being where the victims were taken down on the motorbike at the flyover. The second site was an area of empty land behind a group of vehicles, which was believed to be the site of where Vina was raped, and both teenagers were beaten and killed. The third spot was where the victims' bodies were discarded, at the Tulun Bridge. Strangely, the main scene of the killings and abuse should have warranted a lot of blood if Vina and Eki had been stabbed multiple times with a long-bladed weapon. Yet there was no blood recorded at the scene. There was no blood on the supposed weapons that were used to kill them. No blood found on the clothing of any of the perpetrators. No fingerprints on the motorbike. At least nothing that has ever been proven or released. In August 2024, a lawyer representing 6 of the original convicted murders filed a judicial review to challenge the initial findings. During the judicial review hearing, the defense team presented the court with new evidence to support their argument that the victims were not killed at all, but in fact died in a tragic motorcycle accident. These included photographs of their bodies, which contradicted the claims previously made by the prosecution. There were no signs of injuries inflicted by sharp weapons. The defense also showed a video that formally retracted a witness testimony. However, the prosecution rejected both pieces of evidence, stating that the photos weren't new and therefore weren't valid to the judicial review, and that the authenticity of the video of the witness couldn't be verified. Despite all of these inconsistencies and contradictory evidence, the Supreme Court determined that no significant errors were made by the judges in their criminal trials when assessing the law or the facts of the case. Their judicial review was rejected, and the court upheld the 7 life sentences. The youngest offender, Sakata Tol, had earlier been released on good behavior after serving a little under 4 years of his 8-year sentence, but he ended up also seeking a judicial review. Tol went to social media and claimed to have been a victim of mistaken arrest and that he was forced to confess to the murders. During a media interview, he told reporters that he didn't know the victims, so at the time he was very confused and afraid. The police beat him, kicked him, and even subjected him to electrocution to force a confession out of the young man, who was a minor at the time of his arrest. The National Commission on Human Rights, also known as Komnas HAM, had received a formal complaint made by the lawyer who represented Hadi Saptura, Supriyanto, Iko Ramadani, and the now-released convict Sakata Tol in September 13, 2016. The complaint specified acts of oppression allegedly made against the 4 men, including coercion, obstruction of meetings with legal counsel and family members, forced confessions, and torture. As of May 22, 2025, West Java Regional Police Public Relations Chief Senior Commissioner Jules Abraham Abast stated regarding Sakata Tol's claims that he was a victim of mistaken identity that the public needs to exercise restraint in believing his claims or any claims that are made by the perpetrators. To understand and fully appreciate this case, it is necessary to view it through the lens of the supernatural beliefs that are considered to be part of the national culture and the differences in the criminal justice system in Indonesia. Indonesia is a democratic nation. There are separations of power and checks and balances that overlook each power. Similar to those of the United States, there are executive, administrative, and judicial powers. Indonesia's legal system is pluralistic, based on civil law, customary law, also referred to as adat, religious law, mainly Islamic Sharia. There is one court of general jurisdiction and 3 courts of limited but specialized jurisdiction. They are religious, military, and administrative. There are no juries. Civil and criminal decisions and their subsequent sentences or punishment are determined by a judge, and very often, a single judge. There is a court of appeals and a Supreme Court that has the final voice in legal matters, in addition to a constitutional court. The police have overreaching power, and although the prosecutor has a direct hand throughout the investigative process, there is little oversight over their methods. This leads to many incidents and claims of human rights violations by the police and public outcries of police corruption. Their criminal justice model is primarily focused on punishment and deterrence, very similar to the United States. As a result, their prison system faces the problems that come when incarceration is the principal form of punishment. Indonesia, as of August 2024, had more than 215,000 inmates in penitentiaries and another 53,000 individuals who were being detained, awaiting trial. This has caused an overcrowding rate of 91%. In response, Indonesia has shifted to adopting some more restorative justice methods. Although incarceration is still predominantly used, individuals who commit homicide usually receive a true life sentence or a maximum temporary life sentence, which equates to 20 years. The death penalty in Indonesia is designated as a special punishment for the most serious and atrocious of crimes, which is not limited to homicide. A convicted offender is also eligible to receive the death sentence for terrorism and large-scale drug trafficking. Data shows that over 90% of cases in which an offender received the death penalty was for drug trafficking. There are currently 500 people on death row. The chosen method for executions in the country is death by firing squad, which has been cited as being good practice for the gunmen, although being put to death is still rare. Amongst controversial new legislation that was just introduced in 2026, there is now the possibility that a death row inmate sentence can be commuted to life imprisonment if good behavior is exhibited over a 10-year probation period. This new set of criminal codes dismisses the Dutch-based colonial laws that no longer fit within Indonesian society. In some areas, it is progressive, such as in the option to commute a death sentence to life. However, in other areas, there has been an outcry of human rights violations, with morality-based penalties now being imposed, including prison time, for acts that fall outside of the religion. These can include having sex outside of marriage, which can warrant a year in prison. Other extreme criminal codes include 3 years for insulting the president. An individual can face a 10-year prison sentence for being associated with a Marxist-Leninist organization or otherwise a communist group. A citizen can also face up to 5 years if they deviate from the core teachings of the 6 officially recognized religions. Needless to say, these are digressions in the area of freedom of speech and religion. Indonesia is considered to be one of the most religious countries in the world. Home to the largest population of Muslims, 98% of the people believe that God, religion, and prayers are important, which undoubtedly is reflected in this new legislation. Regarding the spiritual possession of Linda by her deceased friend Vina, this is not a leap of faith in the supernatural. The spirit world is widely accepted and even embraced by many of the cultures in Indonesia. Indonesia is a place of technological advancement with a strong focus on science, but there are many customs and practices that are ingrained with beliefs in the supernatural. Faith in God and belief in the supernatural are not separate from one another. They often coexist, and one can help to understand the other. The many unique cultures and ethnic backgrounds that make up Indonesia, that make it so special and vibrant and unique, have embedded their distinct mythology, folklore, legends, taboos, and even witchcraft into everyday customs and practices. Supernatural phenomena are most commonly associated with ghosts, black magic, and what are known as indigo kids. Indigo kids are kids who possess powers or skills aligned with the supernatural, such as spirit possession, as in the case of Linda and Vina. Stories are passed down generation after generation. There are stories about the Kuntilanak, a female ghost or vampire, the Tuyol, which are mythical childlike spirits, and the Pocong, which is a ghost that appears as a corpse, wrapped in a white burial shroud. These are shared and spread among all religions, classes, and belief systems. And horror has a strong influence on literature, art, and film. Throughout Indonesia's history, it has also not been uncommon for its leaders to claim a mystic mandate to rule. Some superstitions they share are like many other cultures in the world, such as opening an umbrella indoors, which can lead to bad luck, or maybe as serious as causing another person's death, or clipping your nails at night will bring evil spirits, possibly even death, to a family member, which is a commonly believed superstition in many Asian countries, such as Japan, China, India, and the Philippines. Others are strictly found within Indonesian culture and customs, such as how many Javanese people believe that Tuesday is a day of contemplation and that nothing new should be started on that day. Some business owners even close their doors to business at all on Tuesday. This superstition derived from a Javanese proverb, Soloso, Selo, Salon, Manangzo, which translates to Tuesday is the peak quiet of humans. One particularly intriguing belief takes place in Yogyakarta, Amparing Treatise Beach. It is home to Ratu Kudul, also known as the Queen of the Southern Sea, and green is her favorite color. Visitors to the beach are prohibited from wearing green, and there's a sign to help enforce it. Locals believe that if someone wears green on the beach, Ratu Kudul will lure them into the ocean and take them away to her kingdom. These beliefs and customs help to understand why Linda's alleged spiritual possession by Vina was not considered out of the realm of possibility, nor was it deemed as silly, much less unimportant to the case, since through her possession, the horror of what really happened to her and Eki was revealed. But the truth of what really happened on that grim, fateful night to Vina and Eki remains unknown. It is also difficult to not question the authenticity of information given by the victim Vina through her friend Linda's alleged possession, and why, if she specifically named Parong, how is it possible that he wasn't the perpetrator in Vina's rape and both her and Eki's deaths? Some have also questioned if Linda was such a genuinely good friend of Vina's, why did she move away from Cirebon shortly after the recording was given to the police? Maybe I'm just skeptical, but that is suspicious. Some people believe that her alleged spiritual possession was nothing more than a sham. Even stranger is how some people have reported that there is a second recording of Linda being possessed by her murdered friend Vina online. According to various sources, the possible motive for Parong wishing Vina and Eki dead was born out of his jealousy and revenge. Parong and Vina had allegedly been dating before she became involved with Eki, so it's been speculated that this was his motivation for the rape and murders. Did Linda want revenge on Parong and the members of this motorcycle gang for some unknown reason? Or was she somehow manipulated into saying his name? It's all very mysterious and extremely bizarre that the police accepted this recording of an allegedly possessed girl as legitimate investigative evidence. I am open to the concepts of the supernatural, including spiritual possession or being channeled by a spirit. I think it's incredible when the FBI and other strict law enforcement agencies are open-minded enough to work with psychics and others in the world of mystical beliefs to assist them in investigations of missing persons or even homicides. However, I would want more tangible evidence of the crime and proof of who was involved in my child's death before I believed that certain individuals committed the act. This is where the strange and unethical behavior of Eki Rudiani's father comes into question. Is it possible that Eki's police officer, the narcotics officer, and not supposed to be at all involved in a homicide investigation, had ulterior motives against the men who were arrested and convicted? Could this unknown agenda fueled his involvement in the investigation and subsequent targeting and arrest of the wrong perpetrators? I don't understand how the police department allowed him to interview and take the reins over his own son's murder. And if what Didi Rizwanto claims to be true, that he was intimidated and pressured into providing false testimony that placed the 8 men at the scene of the crime, which was backed up by Liga Akbar's later withdrawal of his testimony, how was it determined that no violations were committed? Nothing beneficial can come from Didi and Liga now claiming that their testimony wasn't true. They would realistically be facing charges of perjury and obstruction of justice, and Eki's father should be facing charges of police misconduct and abuse at the very least. But none of this happened. Vina, Alita, and Eki Rudiani's loved ones deserve answers and true justice. But true justice only comes if the right people are punished, which leads to the question of who could have been behind the assault and murders. Is it someone related to an official or high-ranking police officer who's being protected, and these other men have become the unfortunate lambs of sacrifice? Was there even a sexual assault at all? Without any DNA having been taken, there is no way to prove that it was any of the 8 men who were convicted of this crime. And why would the police have neglected to view the CCTV footage near the Tulun Bridge unless there was something and someone they wanted to hide? There are so many levels of corruption, inaction, abuse, and a gross absence of due diligence in this investigation that it's impossible to not question whether it was all a cover-up or perhaps even a ruse to conceal another crime. Could all 8 of these men, all young men in their early to late 20s, be in fact innocent of these horrendous crimes they have been convicted of? With the exception of the minor who was previously released, all of these men are still paying for these crimes with their lives today, and likely will for the remainder of their days. All of the evidence points to these men being innocent. None of it supports, much less justifies, their being locked away in an overcrowded, dirty, underfunded, under-resourced prison cell while the true killers continue to escape justice. There are nothing but questions revolving around this case and holes in the investigation. I wonder whether the people of Indonesia and the world will ever learn the truth behind the deaths of Vina and Eki, or if the secrets and mysteries of that night will forever remain shrouded in darkness. Thank you so much for listening to the fascinating and intriguing murder mystery of Vina, Dewi, Alita, and Eki Rudiani. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas for future episodes, I would love to hear from you. Please reach out. You can find my contact information in the episode description. If you enjoy the show and want to help the community grow, please make sure you are following, leave a reading, and a review. Your support means everything. Thank you. Until next time, stay safe and watch out for shades of murder happening in the streets, next door, especially inside your own home. Shades of Murder is created, researched, written, and edited by Alita Caldwell. Original music, Stranger, composed by Stereo Code.